Uh, Welcome to the Scholarship and Practice Web Lecture Series. It's my honor and delight to be your lecturer this afternoon. Today I'm going to be talking about, it starts from the top, how to shape and sustain positive school culture, how leaders do that. And for those of you participating in this web lecture series, please feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions or if you want to make any comments. You can also raise your hand. There's a little icon with the hand. If you'd like to ask a question orally, verbally, we can unmute your microphone and you can ask directly. So I'm excited to be here. I was asked to talk about how school leaders really shape and sustain culture, school culture. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I teach several classes on school culture and leadership, so trying to condense everything within an hour, a lot of time, will be kind of difficult. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of things that I do in my class, and if any of you are in this attending and are former students, you'll probably recognize some of the things that I'll be talking about today as well. So here's a brief overview of the lecture. I'll give a brief introduction of myself, what I do. I will talk about school culture, how to define that, what that means, and what's leadership got to do with it, and how those two things are combined. And we'll also touch a little bit on the good, the bad, and the ugly of school culture and leadership. And then I want to end on ways we can really sustain positive school culture. And after that point, we'll give you some time to ask some questions and just have frank and intimate conversations about leadership in general and school culture. So hoping we can enjoy our time together and learn more about this. All right, so here's a quick introduction. I'm Dr. Miyan Gonzalez. I started off my career as a teacher at a court and community high school juvenile hall. It was a tough beginning for me. I actually did my student teaching like that as well. And it was definitely an eye-opener about classroom management and just working with at-risk youth. I absolutely loved it. It was challenging at times. I remember my first week of student teaching, there was a fight in class and I was by myself, and it was actually between a boy and a girl fighting each other. And it was pretty intense and I didn't know what to do, and we had to call security in, probation officers came in and so forth, and that was just a real eye-opener about the environment that I was in. But I ended up learning how to really love teaching and being with at-risk youth, and I got really sweet memories about that. So I started off teaching that way, and then from there I went up to become an AP and then a principal, and then ultimately an executive director of a charter school. Throughout this entire time, I was going to the University of Southern California, USC, to get my doctorate in education, with the emphasis on administration leadership. So all of my coursework and my research, everything done there was under the lens of administration, educational administration, and I absolutely loved my time there. From there, I'm now currently an assistant professor in the Educational Policy Leadership Program here at UNLV, and I'm also the program coordinator, where I help do the administrative work behind the scenes for our lovely Educational Policy Leadership Program. That being said, I also teach classes in the Educational Policy Leadership Program, and try to align the classes that I teach with my research interests. As you can see here below, some of my research interests and things that I've published in is school technology leadership. I really love and I'm passionate about school technology leadership. I think technology has really impacted and influenced the way school leaders lead people and students and communities, and definitely shape school culture. And on top of that, I love also leadership development and preparation, right? How do we further develop school leaders? How do we best prepare aspiring school administrators and so forth to be transformational school leaders and foster an innovation foster a culture of innovation at their school sites. So that's, as you can see there, those are the 3 bullets. Those are my research interests, and I try to embed that as much as possible with my teaching here in the Educational Policy Leadership Program at UNLV. So enough about me. Let's get into what we really came here to talk about, and that's school leadership and culture. Well, if we think about this, schools have been trying really hard to change, right? We've had reform efforts for decades at this point, and we've learned through research and just experience as well that there's been minimal progress with all the school reform efforts that have been going on. And it begs the question, why? Right? Why has there been so much school reform efforts, yet minimal progress going on? There isn't a straight answer for this, but there is a process that we're all trying to get to, and that is figuring out how to change and then sustain the change for positive results in all school systems. But if we think about this, the process of generating and sustaining school change, and we are in the business of teaching, excuse me, we are in the business of improving teaching and learning. So when we think about improving teaching and learning, it really only occurs when everybody gets together, the school community, particularly the principal, the school leader, the teachers, and the rest of the school community. When they come together and they really understand and they share their experiences of reshaping their school's culture to better align with their goals and vision. Okay, so you bring everybody together and you talk about, okay, what can we do to really align our practices and so forth to the goals and vision of the school. And so in essence, when we talk about goals, when we talk about a vision for a school, and we talk about sharing and reshaping our practices and our experiences, that is all under the umbrella of culture. And who is in charge of that, or who has the duty to at least influence that? And that is the school leader, right? The school principal or superintendent, if you're looking at the school district, all right? School leadership, really the essence of it is culture building. We tend not to think about, well, the school leader is in charge of culture building, because we think, well, the school leader or principal is in charge of discipline or curriculum or so forth. But that all plays a role of how you do things at the school, which is ultimately shaped by what the school leader dictates. Now, if school leadership is culture building, what is culture? When we hear the word culture, generally speaking, we tend to think of some of the things I listed here on the bullet points. We think of food, we think of language, sometimes we think of music, our history, and artifacts, and so forth. And yes, that is part of culture. But when we talk about school culture or organizational culture, there's a deeper definition of what culture really means. Let me share with you some definitions about school culture or organizational culture. So let's take a look. Here's the first definition. School culture is something that is stable, all right, it's unwritten rules within the school or organization or district, their beliefs, their practices as well, like I mentioned earlier, about what the organization's members think is important and how they should act. All right. So that's one definition. Unwritten rules, right? You're not going to find these practices or beliefs written so much in policy books or manuals of schools or on the walls or whatever. I mean, you might have some things, but remember, they're beliefs and practices of what the members or the teachers and the students in the school community think is important and how they should act. So because these unwritten rules about our beliefs and practices, about what we think and so forth, come to fruition, this really impacts our expectations, the behaviors, and the relationships that we have with everybody within the school community. All right, this impacts the relationship between the school administrators, school leadership and teachers, school leaders and students, school leaders and parents, parents and teachers, and so forth. So I know these are a lot of definitions and so forth, but if you want to make it even more simple, you could just say this: hey, school culture is the way we do things around here. Right? This is what we do, and that's the school culture. So think of stories about your organization or schools. Think about traditions. Think about symbols, the habits, the method, or traditions or ceremonies that are portrayed in your school. All that is part of school culture and stems from what people think is important and how they should respond or to act to what is important to them. Now, if this sounds complex, let's make this even more simple. Think about some of the things that we do in our schools in the K through 12 system that are commonly shared practices, beliefs, and traditions. Here's a couple examples. Think about school bells. Most school bells in the United States, most schools in the United States have bells. They have a schedule. Why is that? Right? Most schools start in the morning. Why do they have to start in the morning? Why can't they start in the afternoon or in the evening? Think about some of the traditions and ceremonies. Graduation. We throw the cap in the air once graduation is completed. Why did we do that? Think about some of the language that we use in our school systems. SPED, IEPs. All right? If you didn't know, or if you weren't in this school culture, you think they may sound like drugs or something, right? So all that is part of our school culture. I remember one time, well, traditionally speaking, students tend to give teachers apples. All right, that's kind of a tradition as a gift or a token of appreciation. And I found that very interesting because where I started teaching, it was a very rural area, agricultural area, and there wasn't any. There was a lot of strawberry fields around. And so instead of using apples, a lot of the students would bring teachers boxes of strawberries to demonstrate their appreciation for them. Just a little something to tell you that the context of the school really plays a role as well with the culture. Now, sometimes what we hear interchangeably is the word culture and climate. And they're not exactly the same. We talked about school culture as really something that is part of your beliefs, your assumptions. But when we talk about climate, school climate tends to refer to the psychological or social environment. It's really about how the school feels about what they're doing. So if culture is, this is the way we do things around here, well, the climate is, well, how do I feel about the way we do things around here? Maybe I don't like it. The schools feel that either really encourages or discourages students' efforts at learning, or even teachers' efforts at developing their own skills and knowledge and so forth. It really reflects an emotional tone set by the school community. Think about this for a second. School safety is part of this school climate. Can I safely express my ideas and concerns? Maybe we do a certain tradition, or maybe we have a certain belief about whatever it is in the school, and this is the way it's been done for years and so forth. But how do I feel about it? Can I really express my concern to teachers, to parents, to the school community, to the school leader about what's being done at the school? And that goes with the school climate. If we go back to the school culture definition, I talked a little bit about assumptions and beliefs. And this plays a major role on school culture, because when we think about school culture, we need to understand that there are really three assumptions that play a major role in shaping school culture. Here are the three assumptions. The ideas about students, what they can or can't learn. Ideas about academics. How do we educate our students? Do we educate? Do we school them? Or ideas about how to help teachers progress and develop their skill and knowledge and dispositions with teaching and curriculum and so forth. And the third idea is, or the third assumption is, ideas about relationships. What quality of relationship should be ideal between teachers and teachers in different departments and grade levels? How should teachers treat their leaders, the school administrators, and vice versa, and students and parents and everybody else within the school community? These assumptions play out every day in our schools, and they're very evident as well. You can tell right away these assumptions just by even walking to the front office of a school. It'll tell you about the school culture, about what they feel students can or can't do, or what teachers can or can't do, and the relationship between or among them. Here are some questions to consider when we talk about these assumptions. Let me put them into practice. Common questions or assumptions in practice. Which students belong in AP courses or accelerated or advanced classes? There again, the assumption comes into play, and that'll shape the school culture. What about homework? What's the purpose of homework? Should I give homework? Is it valuable? We can even throw in grading policies as well. All right. You see how locally here at CCSD, the grading policy has changed, and that's really impacted a lot of the school culture and things that are discussed at home with families and their kids about what's being taken place at school, what learning has taken place, and what needs to be brought from school to home. Who should be involved in the process of improving teaching and learning? Is it only teachers and school administrators that are involved with helping teachers improve? What about students? What about parents? What about businesses? What about the other community agencies? Should they be part of improving the practice of teaching and learning? Good question to ask. What does good teaching look like? That's another assumption that comes into play. Think about how this assumption has really impacted the school culture pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and post-pandemic. Most schools now have Chromebooks that become one-to-one laptop schools. And so the question about what good teaching looks like during the pandemic was really at play. That really shaped morale, the climate and culture of schools, and the teaching and learning that took place. And then coming back as well, right? A lot of these schools had invested millions of dollars into Chromebooks. Kids were coming back with Chromebooks into their classroom. And so that assumption came into play about, well, how do I teach these students in person with Chromebooks in front of them, particularly elementary school students. How did that shape the discussion at the school? What did the school leader talk about, and how's that shaped the school culture in terms of what kids should learn and how teachers should deliver instruction? What's the appropriate way to view parents and guardians' role in educating their children? How much involvement should they have? This question is really at play with some of the controversial topics that have been brought up in the media lately with some new theoretical frameworks that want to be implemented in some of the K through 12 curricula. And to what degree do teachers respect and trust each other? Another question, common questions to ask in practice or assumptions is to what degree do teachers respect and trust their building administrators? And we'll get to that later on in this lecture. To what degree do teachers and school administrators trust their students? These are common questions that we probably don't really think about often because we are on pilot mode. And once we go into a new school or we've been to a school for a while, it's not really questioned as much. You just kind of go with the flow, and without you even knowing, you become part of the school culture and part of the beliefs that maybe you had not been a big fan of from the beginning or did not recognize that it was important in the beginning or during your time at the school. Now, all schools have this continuum of school culture. And it kind of ebbs and flows and goes up and down because most schools fluctuate in terms of personnel. School leaders often come and go, and so do teachers. And so bringing in new personnel ultimately becomes a transformational event within the school that ultimately will reshape some of the values, views, and practices at the school. So as you can see here on this continuum, it is possible to have a healthy school, but a very weak culture in which, you know, maybe a handful of teachers and maybe the one administrator share collective vision, values, and practices that are really about improving teaching and learning and helping student achievement, right? And so it is possible at the same token to have a strong but toxic culture. And when you have a lot of teachers or a lot of the staff members and even administrators that share the same assumptions or views or practices that really undermine the community in the school and is detrimental to student progress. And so clearly, if we look at this continuum here, what we strive to do or to place our school is here on the top left-hand side. We want a strong and healthy school culture, and we want to avoid as much as possible down to the top right or bottom left part of this continuum. So the question may be asked, all right, we all want to be there. We all want this strong and healthy school culture. But what does a strong and healthy school culture actually look like? Or what does a toxic school culture look like, or a weak school culture look like? Well, here's a list of some characteristics that you may find on this continuum. Let's take a look at this list. So on this list, in fact, there's two of them. What we have is the characteristics of a strong and or weak culture. If you take a look on the left-hand side, you see the characteristics. And if you look at perhaps the second line, teachers, students, parents agree on core values. If it's highly shared, you're more likely to have a strong culture. But if it's not, if it's inconsistent, and only a handful of teachers share those values, those core positive values, you're tending to have a weak culture. Take a look at the yellow part where it says time spent communicating values and beliefs. All right, that has a lot to do with the school leader. If the school leader, or school leaders, I should say, spend much of their time communicating the values and beliefs among the school community and not just with their own department or grade level, you'll have a strong culture. But that is really dependent on the first line here about having a clear organizational mission and philosophy. You notice that's the first piece here on this list. So if you're not sure what your mission and philosophy is within your organization or your school, or it's very unclear, you're very likely to have a weak culture, because then nobody knows their purpose. Nobody knows the purpose of their school. Why are they doing what they're doing, and to what extent and to what end? Let's take a look at the other list here. This list here is about healthy and toxic school culture. And forgive me if I'm going a little too fast here. We can always come back to this list if you have some questions or comments. Take a look at the toxic school culture side. Faculty, staff lack shared sense of purpose or caring, going back to the organizational mission and philosophy. Employees want to do their job and leave. They don't want to be bothered. They're just there being isolated, and there is no collective sense of caring or mission or vision or purpose at the school. You're just showing up, doing your work, clocking in your card, clocking out. Faculty tends to blame students and parents for the lack of progress. We've all heard this before. Those kids, these families come from these communities and so forth, right? That plays a role into establishing a toxic school culture. On the flip hand side, if we look on the left, every or almost all the members of the school feels responsible for student learning. That goes with even people who are not in the classroom. Collaboration is important as well. And notice here, collegiality, collaboration, the continuous learning and openness to new ideas. This is, in other words, risk-taking. People at the school are open to new ideas, are open to taking risk, and they're open to problem solving together any issues that they have in their classroom. Now, again, this only happens when risk-taking and the openness and the collective problem solving is encouraged by the school leaders. If it's not really encouraged, or it's not really set up in a way where teachers and staff members and so forth are able to do this together, well, then you're going to have some issues, right? You're going to be leaning towards more of the toxic school culture, or you might have some cliques, right, where only one grade level does it or one department level does it. And remember, that goes back to the last slide that I showed you. Well, if not everybody's on it, then it's a weak culture, where only just a handful of people are doing the collaboration piece, the openness to new ideas, and so forth. So, given this in mind here, leadership as culture creation is really two sides of the same coin: leadership and culture creation. Because if leaders do not become conscious and manage the cultures in which they find themselves, these cultures will manage them. And that's what we don't want, right? We want the leader to manage the culture. We want the leader to really influence and shape a strong, healthy, positive culture. And so leaders are able to do this if they really see the big picture and they understand the influence that they have in really shaping the assumptions that take place daily at their school. And also be able to be coherent to others, teachers in particular, about what this big picture means and what the school is all about. At the very beginning of this lecture, I talked about school reform efforts, how it's been very difficult. And we know that there's been minimal progress because changing school cultures is extremely difficult, and it's awkward, and it's sloppy, and it's messy. And there isn't really a recipe, so to speak, like if you do X plus Y it equals Z, because it varies from school to school. But there are some general concepts, some general things that I'd like to talk about that do help create a healthy school culture. These are things that research has indicated that if leaders are able to apply them and understand them, they're more likely to build a more positive, healthy school culture. So let's talk about these things. I want to talk about what school leaders can avoid. Some things that we definitely need to avoid as school leaders to not have a toxic or weak culture. We'll also talk about what to recognize. What should school leaders recognize that is essential in shaping a healthy school culture? And then what should they establish? Let's go to the avoidance. What should school leaders avoid in order to not have a toxic or weak school culture? The stuff I'm about to show you really, really impacts not only school culture, but directly impacts morale and motivation. So they're not in any particular order, but let's take a look at the first one. Vague and constantly changing performance goals and feedback. When we're trying to establish a healthy and strong school culture, we noticed on that list that a lot of it has to do with collective efforts, and that teachers and the school administrators and students are all on the same page. They understand their philosophy. They have shared practices. They understand the vision and so forth. But when it becomes vague, and when we have established goals that change constantly, it really disrupts the peace and tranquility, and it really disrupts a healthy school culture. Think about this for a second. If we look at teacher evaluations, because remember, this goes back to the assumption about how schools should educate kids and how teachers should teach. If school leaders are giving you vague feedback during teacher evaluations, how do you think that plays a role with improving teaching and learning? It's probably not likely to happen, and we lose trust in the school leader's ability to really help the teacher improve and develop strong teaching and learning skills. When we talk about performance goals as well, all schools have a school improvement plan with goals that they're trying to reach. But if that's constantly being changed, you're moving the goalposts and so forth, it really frustrates people and teachers and school communities in general, and it really kills motivation. Why bother putting so much effort if at the end of the day the goal is going to change and I'm never going to reach it, or you're not recognizing my efforts because you keep changing the school performance goals and so forth? Here's another point as well that we all want to avoid, and this is kind of a general rule of thumb, is dishonesty, unfairness, and hypocrisy. This plays a major role in a weak and toxic school culture, particularly the unfairness part. You see sometimes directly or even indirectly, school leaders or just leadership in general have favorites, and they tend to be biased towards those favorites. And it could be very well within their own grade level or subject area. Right? That tends to be a problem as well when school leaders do teacher evaluations. They tend to be very biased with people within their own grade level or their own subject area. So we really want to avoid being dishonest and unfair, and just think constantly, just having integrity and also being equitable in all of our actions and practices. The next part here is unnecessary rules and work barriers. Right? I've seen sometimes where some additional paperwork is required of school administrators and or of teachers, which really frustrates them, is time consuming, and is vague at the same time. Right? Why am I developing lesson plans on a daily basis? What's the purpose of that? It's taking up my time. It's very vague. I don't know why we're doing this and so forth. Or there's certain checkouts or check-in points that I need to do, paperwork and so forth, that are unnecessary. And it's getting into the way to the heart of my profession, which is teaching and learning. We need to be careful as well when we have constant competition with everybody. I'm not sure how putting up data on walls for everyone to see, that can bring a sense of competition with everybody, right? When you're looking at everybody's or the teachers or the classroom's data and see everybody else's progress on a wall. I understand if you're in a PLC group or within your own department and so forth, but at a wall, I'm not too sure about that practice and how that can really improve teaching and learning. I know there's some research out there and some experiences where it hasn't been the most effective way, and it could create a sense of competition with everybody, and that's not always the best thing when we're trying to build a healthy and strong school culture. And lastly, it's negative and critical bias prejudicial feedback. Right? When it's constant, when the feedback is constantly negative, constantly biased, like I mentioned earlier, or critical, again, that's going to impact morale, and then in return, it's going to affect the culture and then the climate. I don't feel safe expressing anything at my school because I'm constantly getting negative feedback on anything that I do or anything that I touch. So these are some things that we want to avoid as a school leader if we're trying to really develop a strong and healthy culture. We want to keep this in mind as we think about implementing different policies and practices at our school. Is it going to be vague? Am I changing performance goals and feedback? Am I adding another program when we just started a program at the school and so forth? Am I being honest with myself and with my colleagues? Am I adding any work barriers and so forth? Am I making unnecessary competition within teachers and other schools? And am I constantly negative and critical about what is done at my school with my colleagues and my teachers and my school community? Here's what we want to recognize. We need to recognize that credibility is the foundation of leadership. You have to be a credible school leader in order to have a strong and healthy school culture, period. If people, students, teachers, parents, whatever, the school community, if they don't believe that you're capable, if you don't demonstrate that you're capable to do that, then they're not going to believe you. They're not going to believe the message. You have to walk the talk, follow through on promises, practice what you preach, do what you say you will do. If you say that you're going to stop being vague, then you need to stop being vague. If you say that you're going to stop being critical or negative, you need to stop, or adding work barriers and so forth. You have to show that you're credible and that you are reliable. And when we talk about credibility being the foundation of school leadership, this is what I mean specifically. Credibility in terms of benevolence. I look for the good in students, in teachers, and within my school community. I am out here to help, to serve, to help improve teaching and learning and create general healthy relationships with everybody. I'm honest and I'm open. I'm honest to the fact that, hey, I may not know everything. I don't pretend to be somebody else, but I'm open to new ideas. I'm open that I own mistakes. I'm willing to see what other people have done or other teachers have recommended, and then I try to implement them with all fidelity. On top of that, I'm reliable. So if you ask me to do something, I'm going to do it for you. Right? I'm going to be there for you. If you need help, I am there. If you are looking at teacher evaluations, again, I keep going back to that. You know that a credible, competent school leader is going to be reliable in giving you sound and important, pertinent information to help you improve your teaching and learning. That's what it comes down to. Can the school leader be credible? Is the school leader competent? Because if the school leader is competent, you are going to bring people with you to follow, more people with you to follow, to really establish that healthy and strong school culture that we all want. So remember, if you don't remember anything today, we need to remember that one of the key foundational parts of leadership and to sustaining a positive and healthy school culture is credibility and competence of the school leader. Will the school leaders say what they say they will do? Another thing to recognize is that schools, as the school leader, are in constant commotion with these three components: the compliance, the isolation, and the reaction. It's your job as the school leader to wear many masks and hats and so forth, many roles. And one of your roles is to be an advocate as well as a buffer to a lot of these things that I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about the first one, the compliance part. Well, we know that schools were designed after the industrial age complex, and they kind of run like factories, which is why we have bells and so forth, and things are divided into subject areas, compartmentalized and so forth, just like a factory. So because of that, school districts, school systems, and schools in general are very bureaucratic with their culture. But challenging the system of public education has never been kind of the hallmark of educators. We tend to kind of accept new programs and stuff, and then we know that teachers will just go along with it because they just are complicit with most things that happen or that are shoved down with new programs to schools and school teachers. And that's typically because there's trade-offs, right? I'm going to have this new policy, this new program implemented at the school, or this new curriculum and so forth. You get to do it, and here's the trade-off. You're going to have to do this, but I won't bother you. You're just going to be in your class alone. There's high autonomy and not really much accountability on that part. So this compliance culture within our school system, we need to recognize that as a school leader and see how is that impacting my school site's culture. Because we're getting constantly stuff from the state, from the federal, Department of Education, locally and so forth, tons of policies and programs. And so how are you as a school leader going to buffer those to make sure it doesn't really negatively impact the school culture that you're leading? So if we look at the compliance part of this screen, this is what I talked about. Teachers and principals tend not to take risks. They just comply and so forth. The culture tends to be the rule and procedure driven, one-way communication. You're going to do this. You're going to bow your head, and then you're just going to do it, and I'm going to leave you alone in the classroom. And so a lot of these compliance or mandates don't really focus on teaching and learning, or at least give you development ways to improve teaching and learning. It's just like, hey, here it is, you figure it out. So as the school leader, we want to be the in between all this and help transfer a compliance-based culture into an engagement type of leadership. We want to have multi-directional and open communication. School culture is shared among everybody. Yes, the school leader shapes it, but if there's no followers, then you're not really a leader. So it needs to have shared responsibility for strategies and goals. And then the professional talk is centered around the challenges and risks that come from taking on these new compliances. And I get it. Sometimes you can't avoid them. It is what it is. You just have to do it. But this is where you have to have that conversation with the teachers and the school community about learning from challenges and risks and how are these compliance-based mandates going to impact teaching and learning. Another problem or thing we need to recognize is isolation. And I know that some of my students, I've drilled this to them, that isolation really is the enemy of progress. Isolation is a huge problem here in our school systems. For decades and decades, teacher isolation has really, really discouraged learning and our learning capacity, because all day long, teachers are in classrooms without anybody giving them feedback. There isn't much teamwork or collaboration going on at the schools. And because of the isolation, teachers don't really, or schools in general, don't necessarily know how to collaborate together. If you think about some of your teacher preparation classes or courses or whatever, they don't really necessarily teach you how to collaborate with each other and how to share data and so forth. And nobody is ever challenging teachers or even school administrators for that matter, because they're also in isolation, about how effective their practices are. Just because you teach a fun lesson or you do a certain thing as a school leader, a certain practice and so forth, doesn't necessarily translate into effective improvement of teaching and learning. Nobody has been challenged. Nobody has said, hey, look, what you did, it was good, but it wasn't that effective. What did kids learn at the end? Or what did teachers improve at the end of your conference or your meeting with teachers and so forth? So our goal as school administrators in terms of building up, again, that healthy and strong school culture is to break down as much as possible the walls of isolation. So again, we have this left-hand side of isolation, and we want to transition into kind of a distributive leadership approach to establishing our positive school culture. We know that teachers and administrators work in isolation, and nobody knows what anybody else is doing. We don't know who's doing really good work at the schools or within the school leadership component. So we want to transition to the right-hand side and look at teachers and admin work as a public enterprise within the school. Everybody knows what you're doing and how well you're doing it. I got to know. I don't want to go to a school where there's only pockets of excellence. Right? It's always, oh, you talk to this teacher and so forth. Well, I want to know exactly what everybody else is doing. Good teaching and leading exists in random acts of excellence, is what I'm talking about. So the standards of practice for teaching and leading exist. They're shared and specific. Everybody's got together. And like I mentioned this early before, that assumption about how to learn and how to teach has been talked about already. What does good teaching look like in a post-pandemic school? Should be a discussion with teachers and school administrators, right? We get together and we discuss that. Well, how does this match with the NNPF standards, right? Because there's so much technology going on. How do we make sure that those two are aligned? Those are the conversations we have. And then once we have those conversations, we've established a shared understanding of what good teaching looks like. It's clear, it's shared expectations. And now we're ready to collaborate, because I'm going to be going into your classroom and vice versa. I'm going to know about what you're doing. And the school administrator is going to set that school culture up, that environment that will be conducive to teachers sharing best practices and watching each other as much as possible. The last piece here is the reaction. As I mentioned before, the field of education is extremely political, very vulnerable to a lot of trends. This new program here, this new curriculum there. So it's escalating demands, accountability has increased, testing has increased, and so forth. And so because it's very vulnerable to these political whims, accountability is increasing, more and more testing, assessments, Ames Web, SBAC, and so forth. It's really caused all of us to move beyond an appropriate responsiveness to a position of reaction. I got to do this, I got to do this. And most of these reactions don't really necessarily connect the relationship between instructional improvement, because it's all kind of timely. I have to do this test, I have to do that, I'm accountable for this, I have this other demand, and I just got to do it because I'm being complicit again. So how do we avoid this? Well, like I mentioned earlier, there is an absence of well-defined strategies for improving learning, teaching, and leadership. We have highly responsive to external agendas. Sometimes the district does things and we're not sure how to react to them. There's a lot of priorities that need to be implemented in the school, so we don't know which one matters the most. And some of the strategies are not necessarily aligned with the school vision or the community expectations. So kind of reiterating what I just said about sharing best practices and so forth, we really want the school administrator to bring the team, the school together to discuss and establish a focus on instructional improvement and strategies that are well defined about teaching and learning. And so anytime there's external pressures, they need to be assessed and filtered through the school leader, right? So that the school leader can assess, filter them based on the relation to the focus that the school has established on improving teaching and learning. So when that is done, you'll know that how to better use your time, PLC time, your money, your professional development, because they'll all be aligned in the service of improving instruction and learning once the school administrator and the school has really established shared expectations and values about teaching and learning. So what to implement here? We talked about what to avoid, what to recognize, what to implement. Well, it really begins with the principle of school leaders collaborating with teachers and looking closely at their assumptions, what's shaping our attitudes, what's shaping our practices, what are some of our fears, all right, what are some of our doubts and so forth. And then going about how we can change our practices rather than trying to manipulate and change beliefs. Think about that for a second. There's a great book or quote from Richard Elmore, one of the best researchers on school culture and educational leadership, where he stated something to the extent of, I used to think beliefs impacted people's teaching, teachers' practices, but it's the other way around, he said. Now I know that practices impact people's beliefs. So when you have certain practices that are done repeatedly at school, that ultimately will shape your assumption about your capability and student learning. So change the way you practice or change your approach to teaching, for example, and you'll see that students will learn differently because of the effort that you made to change your instructional practices. Another thing too, what to implement is these elements that help change and sustain a school culture. Let's take a look at some of these elements here. And these elements have been sprinkled throughout this lecture. We've talked about traditions. Right? This is important in terms of helping change the school culture. What are the traditions at your school? What are some of the events? What's celebrated at your school? Think about traditions and celebration and so forth. That is very evident the minute you walk into a front office. When you walk into a front office, it'll tell a lot about what is celebrated and what are some of the traditions established at your school. Look at number 11, protecting what's important. Paperwork at minimum. We talked about that, how that can be a huge barrier in terms of establishing a positive school culture. The interruptions, tangible support, trust, confidence. That plays a big role when adults trust each other, when they are credible, when they are competent, and also when they are honest and open, as you could see in number 2. Look at number 3 here, experimentation. So this is a culture of risk-taking, a culture of innovation. It's established at the school. There's intellectual excitement. Teachers, school administrators, students, and the school community try new things. They reach out to different community members or different fields of knowledge and industries and try to embed them into their own school without any fear or punishment. And teachers respect and want to work together and want to collaborate and share best practices. Here are some concluding thoughts. I've only touched on a couple of things. You can tell right away that just on some of the things that I mentioned, that changing and sustaining healthy school culture, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's a complex process. But we know that leadership plays a major role in shaping the culture that supports change and improving teaching and learning for teachers and students. Leadership within any organization, their central responsibility is to create the culture that is going to be conducive to whatever goals that they have. And in our case, in K through 12 schools, it's the leadership's central, or the principal's central responsibility to create a school culture that supports leading, distributively, teaching, learning, that is safe for everybody. Right? It can be safe because, hey, I can express my concerns and my doubts about what we're doing. I can express new ideas that I'd like to implement or like to try out at our school or classroom, etc. There's no single correct way to lead school change. Like I mentioned, school changes or school personnel changes constantly. The context of the school plays a role as well. Things that work in one school may not be replicated or can't necessarily be replicated at another school. It just varies and depends on who the personnel is. Credibility is the foundation of effective school leadership. That is ultimately will ignite a healthy school culture. And then definitely breaking down the walls of isolation and collaboration are key. The more you can break down the walls of isolation and figure out a way where teachers can be exposed to each other, can collaborate with each other, and learn how to do that together, the more likely you will have a strong and healthy school culture. And that includes breaking the walls of isolation with school administrators. Sometimes they're stuck in the front office. We know that. We know by research that they're not in the classroom as much as they should be. So that's also a challenge for school administrators, is trying to break down their own walls of isolation and collaborate as much as possible with teachers and students. This concludes the lecture for today. I'm going to stop here, and I appreciate your time with me this evening. And I'm really passionate about school leadership, and I know that this isn't an easy process, but being part of developing and establishing a positive and healthy school culture is very rewarding. It's very rewarding. And there's just something unique and special about being part of that, and being influential in shaping that positive school culture. And it's a journey that I wish all of us would join. To me, school leadership is everything. It's really everybody's business because it influences every aspect of our lives. All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone.